The decision to kneel during the national anthem by 32 Denver Broncos players last weekend, joining over 200 other players across the country, triggered a variety of reactions throughout Colorado. Broncos Vice President John Elway announced this week that the team will be standing in unity this weekend. Patty, I got to say, last weekend was just surreal, whether it was just the comments that kicked off everything to the reaction we saw across the country, but specifically here in Denver. What did you make of the reaction to what happened, and now that we've heard from the Broncos that all the team will be standing in unity this upcoming next game?
Well, first of all, I think it was inappropriate for you to call us sons of bitches before we started the show just because we all wanted to kneel in solidarity. The first lesson is, if you are the President of the United States, you do not tweet calling people sons of bitches for practicing their First Amendment rights. And let's remember, this is not anti-patriotic kneeling. These are people, the kneeling started because of the concern over social injustice in this country, pervasive racism. That's where the kneeling started. It wasn't because people don't support the troops overseas. It wasn't because people don't want to sing the Star-Spangled Banner. It wasn't unpatriotic. There's actually nothing more patriotic than going with your First Amendment rights. I would hope there wasn't a lot of arm twisting by the Broncos in their decision to everyone will stand in solidarity and hug and everything else they're going to be doing. I think a team manager, a team owner can ask their employees to do things that maybe the President of the United States shouldn't. But I also think John Elway, when he said he doesn't want to politicize the Broncos, would have carried a lot more weight if he hadn't already been sending out letters on behalf of Republican candidates and Neil Gorsuch on Bronco stationery. So I truly hope all the players feel they have had their say, they are still getting their say. And if they stand in solidarity this weekend, fine. But the lesson is for Donald Trump in the response across the country.
Mike, I got to be honest, this feels like an enormous distraction out of all the different things we can be thinking about as a country, even locally here in Denver, to be talking about this. And especially distracting, I think, what Patty said about the issue where the kneeling started. It was, like she said, it was about flags or troops. It was about that seemed to get buried in the avalanche of everything else. What did you make of what happened and of what we're likely to see this weekend?
Well, first, it appears that Trump is either just a bumbling president or a brilliant strategist, because he appears to be able to change the news cycle at his will through tweeting, and it actually reflects fairly poorly on the rest of the country that apparently falls for it time and time again, that he could literally swing a news cycle in whatever direction he wants to, and who knows what he might have been trying to swing it away from in this particular case. It's an interesting look at the freedom of expression, because, look, the NFL players, and the degree, by the way, to which you are offended by this or not offended, really has a lot to do with, A, your politics, because remember, some of the same people who were mightily offended and outraged that Tim Tebow expressed his faith on the field through expression were defending the NFL players kneeling for the anthem. NFL football players have a right of free expression. However, fans also have a right of free expression, and what you saw was players express themselves, a lot of fans express themselves, and the one thing the NFL players do not have a right to is either a job or to contravene the desires of their employers within their employment contract. So the Broncos have the Broncos can certainly tell their players that they must stand for the national anthem, and if they don't like that, then they don't have to be professional football players. Let's keep some, but there's a bigger picture here. A professional football player has no power over me or anyone at this table or anyone else. So how they express themselves, your degree of outrage over this is really decided by the degree that you don't have any control of your emotions. And this is what being offended is all about, right? The President of the United States, on the other hand, actually has power over people. He actually has power. And the First Amendment does not apply to the Broncos. The First Amendment actually applies to Donald Trump and the United States government. It is there to restrain them. And so for a sitting president to essentially demand that a private employer fire private citizens because he doesn't like the way they express themselves is probably the most troubling aspect of this whole thing.
Eric, we've seen a variety of teams handle this in a whole variety of ways. How the Dallas Cowboys did it, how Green Bay Packers did it just last night. How did you think about how the Denver Broncos are handling this?
I think the Broncos are, like a lot of teams, let last weekend be this eruption of emotion and First Amendment right and political statements, and they now want to get back to business and somehow put this issue in the past. Let's not forget the NFL is facing a whole lot of challenges, and this is just one on the list in terms of CTE, what football, and particularly football at that level, does to its participants' brains. NFL audiences were declining before this came up as an issue, and let's not lose sight of that. So I think, it's hard to imagine life without football as the king of sports, but, boxing used to be the king of sports as well. And these things go through cycles. Mike made reference to, or I think your question to Mike made reference to, this is a distraction. And I look at Donald Trump as the king of distractions. He is a master at distraction, and that's what this was. That said, he continues to throw this bait out there. And I think the opposition, the resistance, if you will, to Donald Trump has to be a heck of a lot more discerning and discriminatory than they are right now in terms of which bait they take. And I am not convinced that this was the bait they wanted to take and fight on. I actually think, I'll be curious when we see polling numbers. Right now we're really just seeing rating numbers for the NFL, and they certainly fell off last weekend. But I'm not so sure that Donald Trump, as wrong and as crazy and as reprehensible as he is not closer to public opinion on this than all of those fans wearing Colin Kaepernick jerseys, if you will, are. Who knew? I mean, we used to tune into games, to watch the last 2 minutes, to watch John Elway comebacks or whatever, and now the most exciting part of the game is the national anthem, and go figure.
Penn, I guess I'd be very curious to find out how Colin Kaepernick feels about this, because he does a protest last year. Everything blows up, and now he doesn't have a job. And there's a lot of discussions before, at least before 2 weeks ago, of that is he going to get hired in the NFL? We're seeing players with hardly any experience getting hired before he does. Then this comes up, and over 200 players make a similar statement. Now, whether just for that week or not, you have a renewed look at the issue that Colin Kaepernick was trying to raise, but now that's kind of getting swept under because of the immense reaction. How do you look at what we've seen these last 10 days?
On several levels. And Colin Kaepernick, I suspect, is probably pleased that the conversation is taking place, because he's clearly been scapegoated for exercising his constitutional right to express himself. And initially, remember, he didn't do it in an open and confrontational way. It was something he sort of did quietly at the bench. When Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf was here as a basketball player, he used to just bow his head and pray at the playing of the national anthem also. No one cared until someone wrote a story about it. Then it generated all of this outrage. Think about this. The kneeling we've seen the last week at these NFL games, they've been a reaction to the president's race baiting, not in solidarity necessarily with Kaepernick. A number of players got so offended and so outraged that they reacted. And you've got a president using inappropriate language in public, calling predominantly African-American athletes SOBs for expressing their opinion. But the Nazis and the Klans people in Charlottesville are some very fine people. There is a disconnect, and clearly we need to still have a conversation about race in this country, but I would submit the way the president's putting it front and center is problematic. Then the final thing, and I agree with Mike's point also about the president who has power shouldn't be telling employers to fire private citizens because he doesn't like the way they think. We can talk about First Amendment rights, but, when you go all the way back to the preamble of the Declaration of Independence, it says, that government derives its power from the consent of the governed, and that whenever any form of government becomes destructive to these ends, it is the right of the people to alter and abolish it. Protest is inherent in our founding. Remember, it was a revolution, not negotiations, that formed America. So we have revolution and conflict and speaking out against oppression as part of our national DNA. And for one person to try to say, well, no, now that I'm in charge, that all goes away because everybody has to do what I say, is troubling.